Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. So much to do over the course of the next few minutes. As you would imagine, a lot of that going to center around UGA recruiting as visits get back going here this week. Georgia expected to host some guys here this weekend. What's going down with that? A couple of Georgia Targets visits they're not taking. That seems to be interesting here right now. We'll give Jeff Sentell also a chance to react to what we talked about yesterday, what seems to be a little bit of mystery and intrigue kind of mixed into a scenario where otherwise Georgia fans feel, I think, still fairly confident in how things are going to go down on August 5th with KJ Bolden. We saw Dylan Raiola for the first time in our state this week, also kind of representing himself as a Georgia high school quarterback. We'll touch on all of that too. Boy, a lot to get to, including the idea that Georgia could be on commitment watch here this weekend there as well. So there's that. Plus, we begin the show today by making fun of the team that we've kind of taken to calling Mighty Michigan because of all the hype that exists around them here right now. So we'll have some fun with that and see if little old Georgia can stay competitive with the rest of the college football world here right now. So what do you say we get it going? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Kroger. It begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
One of the fun subplots of this summer so far has been the emergence of the team we sort of call Mighty Michigan, because despite the fact that Michigan lost last year to TCU, a team that Georgia beat 65-7, and despite the fact that Michigan lost in 2021 to Georgia so bad I thought the Wolverines might give up the sport, despite all of that, there has been this, what seems to be a concerted effort to sort of proclaim Michigan as perhaps the team to beat in college football here this year. Now, odds makers aren't going to reflect that. Georgia is still the odds-on favorite to win the national championship, and Georgia will be the preseason number one team to begin the season. Both the coaches and the media, when those official polls come out, they're also the number one ranked team in the kind of unofficial polls too. Some of this, though, is just the chatter, the talking season fodder, where there's just a desire, if you can, to find something to make this year hopefully more interesting. And, you know, the national media types, they don't like repetition. They never really have. And if you can talk up a team like Michigan, that's always really good business to do, because Michigan is, after all, one of the largest fan bases out there. You can't dispute that. They may be overrated at times in the field, but their overall fan base cannot be understated. There are millions of Michigan fans, populous state, heritage program. It's always good business to sell the idea of the Wolverines being on top of the college football world as if this was the 1960s. Well, that has kind of happened some over the course of this offseason. We have certainly seen that. I guess the most prominent example is Reese Davis, the host of ESPN's College Game Day. You've heard me play this clip before, but I need to play it again because of the context it provides. Here is Reese Davis sort of kind of casting the narrative for Mighty Michigan going into the 2023 season.
Michigan has a proven quarterback that I think is going to improve greatly this year. They've got the best cornerback in America in Will Johnson. They've got some transfers on both lines of scrimmage, including a pass rusher that should shore up some of the things that they've lost. They've done a really good job in the transfer portal the last couple of years, particularly on the lines of scrimmage. They've got their running backs coming back, a couple of wide receivers that might even be bigger threats, transfer tight end from Indiana, I believe. I think if I had to fill out the ballot right now based on what I know, the type of production I know I'm going to get, I think I'd put Michigan number one.
Well, I guess there's no point playing the season. They've got a transfer tight end from Indiana. You can't do anything about that. I guess there's just no point. Mighty Michigan just cannot be beat here this year. Now, we've obviously laughed at Reese Davis saying that before. We've laughed at other media types who've kind of tried to follow suit on all of that. But we have, at times, given Michigan some credit, because one of the things we also talked about is that Jim Harbaugh, I guess, had let it slip, or it kind of came to be reported. Bruce Feldman, I believe, had this first. Bruce, by the way, has also been one of these national media types who seems to be in love with Mighty Michigan here right now. But Feldman reported that during practice here this year, Michigan had some plans to do what they were going to call their Beat Georgia practice period. And our overall take on this was a little bit different than some people would have assumed. Our thought was, well, this is an example of Michigan actually doing the right thing. there's nothing wrong with having stated goals. You ever heard the old cliche about, hey, shoot for the moon, and if you miss, at least you land in the stars or some sort of corny thing like that? There's nothing wrong with having aspirational goals, and even if you don't quite achieve them, you probably achieve otherwise more than you maybe thought you could have. There's nothing wrong with that in life. And setting your sights on Georgia, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If anything, Michigan was capable of doing something that a lot of other media types seemingly have been incapable of doing, which is acknowledging that Georgia is the top of the college football world. And listen, as I've said many times before, Georgia fans are the reigning kings of this sport here right now, and they get to decide how benevolent of a dictatorship they want to run. And if Georgia fans were to say, we don't actually want to be all that gracious right now, we want everyone acknowledging us at all times, I think that's their right, that's their prerogative. After all, many of us, if you've got a few years on you anyway, you have been waiting a long time to see your team on top of the sport. And now that you're there, you want everything that's coming your way. You want the acknowledgement of, you know what, no one plays college football at the level that Georgia does right now. I think there's some media types who've embarrassed themselves by failing to do that. Michigan, though, by acknowledging the Dogs with their sort of beat Georgia period during practice, that's the right level of respect, I would say, for the team that is where Michigan wants to be. And there's nothing wrong with the Wolverines wanting to be aspirational. However, this week, we have found out more details about exactly what these beat Georgia practice periods entail for the Wolverines. And here is where I think some Georgia fans are going to have a chance to get themselves a little bit of a laugh at Michigan's expense here. Once again, Bruce Feldman, the guy who has had this before, tells us this. We'd reported last month that Michigan, which added a beat Georgia period in 2021, now has which added a beat Ohio period in 2021, now has a beat Georgia period. I asked Mike Santristel, is that how you say that? Santristel about it. He says, yeah, Coach implemented a beat Georgia period where we'd go heavy, 12 and 13 personnel. I'm pretty sure that's going to be every practice. Now, the 12 personnel, the 13 personnel, what that means is 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends on the field. So basically saying, hey, we want to make this a fight at the line of scrimmage. We're going to go heavy set, 2 tight ends, maybe 3 tight ends, and we're going to do hand-to-hand combat with Georgia right there at the line of scrimmage. Let me say this as sincerely as I'm capable of saying anything. If you watched film on Georgia and determine that the weakness and the vulnerability with Georgia lies at the line of scrimmage, then you need to fire the entirety of your scouting department. You need to literally clean house and start over from scratch. I mean, can you imagine this for 5 seconds? The idea of Georgia, who has marched through the last 2 seasons, 29-1, won the last 2 national championships, and you're sitting around the coach's room, and you kind of picture this in your mind. You're kind of sitting around the coach's room. Old, grizzled veterans get their feet up on the table. You know, the dry erase board's got some stuff scribbled on it. The conversation's going, what do we do about this Georgia? Where is Georgia weak? Where does the vulnerability, rest with these Dogs? And the Michigan folks apparently said, you know what? I think that defensive line may be vulnerable. I think we can kind of go get Georgia there along the defensive line. I think all it might require is just another tight end on the field, or maybe 2 more tight ends on the field. Let's just put 3 tight ends on the field. We'll battle them at the line of scrimmage. That's clearly Georgia's weakness and its vulnerability. Can you imagine a scouting report that would determine that about UGA? I mean, I would dare say those are people that don't need to be scouting anymore. And by the way, and this is not part of the topic, but I'll just going to throw this in for free. If the Michigan offensive line is so good, they've, after all, won the Joe Moore Award the last 2 years, then how come they need 3 tight ends on the field to block Georgia? Like, that may be a question worth exploring here a little bit, too, because the other thing we kind of get into from time to time about mighty Michigan is the fact that no matter how good the Georgia offensive line seemingly is, Michigan sort of owns the Joe Moore Award. They've won it the last 2 years as the nation's top offensive line. Well, if they are so good, then how come at practice Michigan acknowledges that to beat Georgia, they got to put 3 tight ends on the field just to block Georgia? That might tell me a little bit more about the Michigan offensive line and the ludicrous nature of the Joe Moore Award, honoring them as the nation's best the last 2 years. That's just sort of a free add-on to the regular topic. You can think about that, I guess, on your own free time. But to go back to the main point here, so Michigan's belief is, hey, to beat Georgia, all we got to do is just put an extra blocker or 2 in the game. We'll battle them hand-to-hand combat right there on the line of scrimmage because, after all, the one thing you know about Georgia is they have a nasty habit of being pushed around on the lines of scrimmage, said no one ever. And by the way, to kind of bolster the point that I'm making here, I saw this from our friends at Pro Football Focus the other day. Some people's cup of tea, admittedly not everyone's cup of tea. But Pro Football Focus put out its ranking of top defensive lines in the country. If you pay any attention whatsoever, you're probably not surprised to find out that Georgia has, expected to be, the top returning defensive line in the country for the 2023 season. And you may say, well, or if you're not a Georgia fan, you may say, but yeah, Jalen Carter's not there anymore. And you may say, yeah, Nolan Smith's not there anymore. But what Pro Football Focus wrote in the story, I'll read a couple sentences to you. Even after losing Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith, both of whom were 2023 first-round picks to the Philadelphia Eagles, Georgia still has the best defensive front in college football. That's from Pro Football Focus. Now, some people like PFF, some people don't, but that is an objective source in all this saying, hey, they may have lost Jalen Carter, and you can sort of count, outside linebacker, edge rusher types as kind of a defensive front right now. They lost Nolan Smith too, but that's still the best in college football. You mentioned Mikael Williams. You mentioned Nazir Stackhouse, who, by the way, is first team All-SEC. Warren Brinson, Walthour, Chambliss. Obviously, guys taking a bigger step up like Marvin Jones Jr. You can kind of mention all those names. So the point we're getting to here is, and I know it sounds obnoxious when I say this, if Michigan really is the biggest threat to Georgia, and if Michigan's best chance to beat Georgia is to do battle with them along the line of scrimmage, the belief that we're going to be tougher at the line of scrimmage than Georgia is, then the season's already over. Now, we don't believe the season's already over. We believe that winning any national championship is difficult. Winning a third straight national championship is especially difficult for reasons we can't even predict or foresee right now. College football didn't get magically easy overnight. It is still a difficult sport to win in, and certainly a difficult sport for the rest of us to predict. So we think there's weirdness on the way that's going to put Georgia to the test at some point in time. But if this is the test, then Georgia's already passed it. We saw them in 2021. Michigan didn't belong in the same field as UGA. And if the pathway to the Wolverines to, quote, beat Georgia here in 2023 involves being better at the line of scrimmage, then Michigan might as well give up the sport right now. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. We are happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us. What is episode 1998 of our program? That means on Tuesday, Lord willing, we'll celebrate our 2,000th episode. I can't even believe that they've let me stick around here for such a long time, but I am so thankful to be able to do it, and so thankful to all of you who are part of it with us on video, Facebook, and YouTube, and Twitter, and yeah, we still call it Twitter. I don't know if do people actually call it X now? We still call it Twitter. I also am from Georgia. We call every soft drink Coke, so I'm not changing what I call Twitter just because somebody wants me to. Anyway, whether you call it Twitter or X, or on that video platform, or on the other video platforms there too, all of them, one day they may change their name, but we'll still be on them there as well, I'm imagining. We're on the radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we're available as a podcast wherever you find them. Apple, Spotify, worldfamous DawgNation.com. So many different ways for you to connect with our program. And a big thanks to our friends at Kroger, who've pretty close been with us since the start of this thing, and we're certainly happy to have them as a part of all of that. And a couple of things I want you to know about Kroger. First of all, Kroger Chef Jr. returns a couple of times during the month of August. This is going to be fun, and it's themed around the Atlanta Braves the month of August there as well, which is a really cool thing. How about chili slaw dogs? A lot of you can't go to a Braves game without getting a dog. Well, here's a good one for you. Chili slaw dog. A couple of times to do that here in the month of August. August 12th and the 26th. Of course, select Kroger locations got you on that. Now, here's what's cool. It's still just $7 per child, as it always is, but the collection of things you get for $7, in addition to making the chili slaw dog, which sounds good in its own right, how about this? You also get the Atlanta Braves apron. So, when you do the Kroger Chef Jr., you always get some kind of cool stuff for doing that. But this month, because of the partnership with our friends at the Atlanta Braves, you get the Atlanta Braves apron on that. You also get a patch, a chef's hat, a recipe card, and a holder, and some tongs. That is $7 per child. So go to KrogerChefJr.com for more on that. The word junior spelled out, Junior, KrogerChefJr.com today. Also, speaking of our friends at Kroger, they're getting you ready for back to school right now. Not everybody treats back to school as good news. For some of the young kids in our audience, they are certainly maybe not excited about that. Some of the teachers are kind of, I'm not quite so sure about that either. But one way or another, it is here. It's happening. And even if you're not quite super enthused about back to school, I know you'll be excited about this. It's our Celebrating Outstanding Teachers contest, once again, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. So if you have not nominated someone for this yet, you need to. Whether it's a teacher in your family, your child's teacher, a teacher in your community, someone from the neighborhood school, teachers that are doing great things, we want to celebrate those. And the week of August 7th, we're going to start announcing those celebrating teachers winners, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. And each teacher who wins gets 4 great gift cards. $100 to Kroger, $50 to Home Chef and Bath & Body Works and Target. So 4 great gift cards coming the way there of our celebrating teachers winners. And the good news is, if you nominate one of our winners, you also get to be a winner there too. You'll get a $50 gift card to Kroger, and you'll get a DawgNation gift bag, which includes a t-shirt and some really cool stuff. So that is all on the way, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. Make sure you check that out. Go to DawgNation.com. We have a great staff of technically savvy folks. I'm clearly not one of those. We have a great staff of technically savvy folks. They have made making a nomination for this super, super easy. So go to DawgNation.com. You can find out more about that today. All right, so that is that. Coming up in a couple of minutes, I made a promise to Jeff Sentell. We're going to get to him quickly today because I know a lot of you have got a lot of questions about Georgia recruiting. We're going to cover a bunch of that. We talked about defensive line. The defensive line recruiting stuff for Georgia right now is red hot. There are some very, very juicy kind of subplots to what's happening for Georgia along the defensive line. We'll talk about that. We'll react to more of the KJ Bolden stuff from yesterday and just all kinds of stuff with Jeff Sentell coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, I want to go around the DawgHouse. Poured today by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. Boy, a Friday with the Finish Long Drink, that always sounds like a really good idea. And I want to go back to something late in the show from yesterday. Not everybody gets a chance to, this time of year anyway. Sometimes you have folks who maybe don't get a chance to listen to the show as it airs live, and maybe you've missed Thursday's show. It's really worth going back and checking out the full episode. We had some great stuff involving KJ Bolden from Jeff Sentell to kick things off yesterday. And then near the end of our program, for the first time in a little while, we brought back former Georgia quarterback David Green onto the program. And there's a couple of things that David said that I think we're going to unpack on maybe future episodes of our show. But one thing in particular I wanted to circle back to here right now. David was Georgia quarterback starting in 2001 through 2004. And working there as a Georgia quarterback in the Mark Richt era, he was also working with Mike Bobo kind of prior to Bobo becoming offensive coordinator, but as kind of a quarterback's coach. So Bobo and Green kind of worked closely together there on that. And at the time, Mike was not really all that much older than Dave Green was. So it was a very early stage of the Mike Bobo coaching career, but it was an opportunity for David Green to get some insight into the personality that Mike brings back to him now in his second stint as Georgia offensive coordinator. So one of the things I wanted to have David on the show for yesterday was to ask him about, hey, for people who kind of know Bobo as a friend of Kirby Smart's or as a guy who's, kind of been around the Georgia program for a while, you've actually worked with him. He has coached you. What more can you tell us about Mike Bobo's coaching personality and what David Green, the former terrific Georgia quarterback, said about that? I thought it was really interesting. So this is David Green on Mike Bobo.
Yeah, I would say Coach Bobo, his personality, demeanor is a lot closer to Kirby. I mean, he is a fiery, competitive guy. I mean, I can only imagine, Kirby and Bobo together. I mean, they're extremely competitive. They want to win. He's proven time and time again he can really he can score a lot of points. There's no question with that. And I love the fact, I think Brandon more than anything, that he's had a year under his belt already.
So to hear, and I think a lot of us are kind of, aware of this, I guess, to hear the idea that from David Green's standpoint of, oh my gosh, Mike Bobo, the fiery competitor, a guy who really coaches you hard and really kind of gets up into your grill a little bit from time to time, that he's really a lot more like Kirby Smart. And I think if you're a Georgia fan, you're like, okay, well, sometimes you sort of think about the idea of the good cop, bad cop, and we kind of know that Kirby Smart kind of plays the role of, very intense figure in the Georgia program. And David Green right there says, having been coached by Mike Bobo, even when Bobo was very young, from David's perspective, Mike is just like Kirby Smart. Maybe that's why they've, been, I guess, longtime friends, that he's also really intense as well. And what's funny about that is it also kind of resembles something that Brock Vandagriff told us back during spring practice there too, that when it comes to like casting a big shadow and being an intense figure as a coach, this is something that David Green said he saw from Mike Bobo way back in the early 2000s. This is something that Brock Vandagriff said, you know what, it's still just as true now as it ever was. This is what Vandagriff said back during spring.
Coach Bobo, he's pretty intense. On the first day he came in the quarterback room, he said, I'm gonna coach y'all hard, and I hope y'all are open to that. And heck, he didn't really give us a choice. He said, I'm gonna coach y'all hard, and that's the way it's gonna go. And we all said yes, sir. And I think it's been really good just the way he's been coaching us. He has a reason for everything he does. his meetings go well, and yes, sir.
So I think that you get a pretty full and clear picture there of the coaching style of Mike Bobo, from David Green from early 2000s, from Brock Vandagriff a few weeks ago. The idea that this guy is going to take the same edge and intensity that Kirby Smart brings to the entire program, is going to kind of provide that on the offensive side of the ball too. And I will tell you, just kind of talking to people who know some people who know some people who know some people, like a couple of things I've sort of heard about Georgia, over the course of this summertime is, like, people kind of around the periphery of the program have been talking about how impressed they've been with some of the summer workouts that Georgia's been going through. And yet I've also kind of heard through the grapevine that Kirby's never been more intense and never been more like peeling paint off the walls on a daily basis inside that football building than he has been over the course of the last few weeks. So you've got this, Kirby Smart figure who, even after 2 national championships, is still, kind of standing on a razor's edge as much as he ever has been before, bringing the full-fledged intensity each and every day. And you've got Brock Vandagriff and David Green saying, and Mike Bobo's right there doing the same thing there too, which, if you kind of think about kind of the overall, I guess, balance that a program requires, I think that makes the job of these position coaches this year pretty interesting. And we kind of think of, Brian McClendon and Todd Hartley and Del McGee, and if you just want to keep the offensive side of the ball for a moment, Stacey Searles. We think about these guys as sort of being good dudes and pretty good advocates, I'm assuming, for the players in their position group. And just given the overall intensity of the Georgia program right now, those guys, kind of being a little bit of a filter for some of that's probably pretty important, and I'm guessing that's kind of a role they probably play here this year. But it's interesting from both Green and then Vandagriff echoing that, just how intense that Mike Bobo is going to be as Georgia offensive coordinator. And then one more thing on Mike, and then we'll turn our attention fully to Georgia recruiting. The other thing that David Green kind of brought up is something that Mark Richt, Green's former head coach, also brought up on our show a couple of weeks ago. The idea that you get a guy like Mike Bobo, who is a seasoned coach in his own right, but he also steps back into the role as Georgia offensive coordinator after having apprenticed again at Georgia in the 2022 season. And according to David Green, that experience around this version of Georgia before taking back over as offensive coordinator again, according to a guy who knows the quarterback position as well as anyone could, David says for Mike Bobo, that's incredibly valuable. This is more from yesterday's show.
He already understands, the terminology they were using from last year. He understands the personality, the personnel of the team. And he understands probably the way what Kirby's looking for. And so I think it's great. I think it's a lot harder sometimes when you're just coming in for the first year and trying to get used to, being around the team and the personnel and how Kirby's doing. But he's already been there for a year. He's got a good feel of what kind of players he's got around him, because that's key for an offensive coordinator, right? You're trying to figure out, like, how do I maximize, my team's skill set. And he had a head start because he was already evaluating and drawing up plays last year for the team.
That is very, very similar to what Mark Richt said on our show, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, that who Mike Bobo is a coach right now, returning as Georgia offensive coordinator, is not the same one he was here when, you think about, 2014 and before that, I guess, 06 through 14. That was the span of time in which Mike Bobo was the offensive coordinator, that he's not the same guy that he was then. He's worked with a bunch of different guys over the course of that, sort of post-Georgia period. He also watched the way in which Todd Monken worked a year ago. And you would, of course, lean in and watch that closely because Monken was so successful. And Monken's departure undoubtedly leaves big shoes to fill. No one's going to deny that. But I do believe that Mike Bobo more than capable of filling those shoes. We've already seen him have a big impact on Georgia recruiting. And the intensity that David Green talks about and that Brock Vandagriff echoes, that intensity, that competitive fire, also I think motivates Mike to step in and not just take the Georgia offense from where it was and kind of keep it going, but maybe take it to that next level there as well. This is a fun side of the ball to watch for UGA this year. Deeper at the wide receiver position, perhaps we've seen Georgia be. Best offensive line that Mike Bobo's ever worked with, almost you would imagine that has to be true. Intriguing quarterback competition. The offensive side of the ball for Georgia is going to be very, very fun. And the impact that Mike Bobo has a chance to make could truly be substantial. We'll make that around the DawgHouse here today, poured by our friends at the Finish Long Drink. And obviously on a Friday, we're in a good mood. We're rolling into a weekend, one of the last really small handful of weekends we have without football here. And so that means a lot of you going to the pool, you're going fishing, you got the cooler in the, as you go there, you're going out play golf, whatever else. whatever you're doing here this particular week, take the Finish long drink with you. You've heard me talk about the long drink cranberry before, the long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume, long drink zero, that's no carbs, no sugar. The long drink traditional, I've always kind of liked that. It's the blue can. I'm a traditional guy, I guess. I'm a traditionalist in all things, including my beverages. The blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, those are all great options for you. But did you know right now, for a limited time only here in the state of Georgia, you can also get the peach-flavored version of the Finish long drink there as well. A perfect beverage for the peach state, and it is so great for your summertime fun. So get settled in. Goodness knows it's going to be hot enough outside. Get that cooler really. And I love these new coolers that keep the cans just like ultra cold. There's something better than like just a super ultra cold can of the Finish long drink in one of these great new coolers. It just sort of seems to work so much better than ones did when we were younger. Great stuff. Keep that Finish long drink there on ice. Enjoy. If you like mixed drinks, this is a ready-to-drink cocktail right there in a can. It looks like a beer, but it's not. It's a really fun category of the ready-to-drink cocktail. You'll love the Finish long drink, and you will especially love, I believe, the Finish long drink peach-flavored version. So make sure you find that online at thelongdrink.com. Great to have them as a part of Around the DawgHouse here today. Okay, so before we are done, we may be seeing, I'm going to use a fancier phrase than I should use, a tectonic shift happening in college athletics right now, where the Pac-12 is fighting just to survive, and I'm not quite so sure how successful that fight's going to be. Also, an update on where things are heading for a relatively notorious SEC figure who's been in the news a little bit over the course of the last couple of months. We'll cover all of that, and we've got some very, very funny golden shoes to close out our week. Sort of an old-school Friday shoes dump for us today. We'll do that here before we're all said and done. But for now, y'all, it is major league rumor mill stuff involving Georgia recruiting, so I want to cover it all. Let's do it here. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We bring on Jeff Sentell, our recruiting insider, right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So we'll bring on Jeff Sentell, who I thought had an outstanding episode of Before the Hedges presented by Kroger this past Wednesday. And Jeff, a lot to probably unpack from that particular episode, some of the great interviews you had. But I want to begin this way. I thought maybe the most interesting thing about the conversation that you had, or some of the conversation that you had on Wednesday and made, us able to enjoy, was the fact that for Georgia fans who are busy, they got families, they got jobs, they're not following Georgia recruiting on a full-time basis. They just simply don't have time to. The DeMarcus Riddick thing this week, Riddick flipping away from Georgia going to Auburn, may have caught them off guard. Now, for people who are reading your content on a regular basis or watching your shows on a regular basis, they're a lot more plugged into that, but not everybody has time to just sort of follow every twist and turn of this Georgia recruiting process. So for some people, the Riddick news was new information here this week. But to hear Chris Cole on your show, not Chris Cole, excuse me. I knew I was going to be doing this eventually. Chris Jones, two linebackers from Virginia with the same first name is going to cause me all kinds of problems. I can tell you that right now. To hear Jones on your show this week saying he'd already been having conversations with Georgia coaches about the Riddick situation and the opportunity that might create for him gives you an idea that while some Georgia fans may have been caught off by the Riddick news, Georgia itself not caught off at all. Other linebackers seeing the Riddick announcement this week as great news because it just meant an opportunity to be a part of what may truly be a historic class. That opportunity may have opened up for them.
Definitely. Brandon, I'll just tell you what I see sometimes, and I don't have to overly report it and hit folks over the head with it. I think I said a while back on Before the Hedges where let's rewind a little bit. DeMarcus Riddick committed to Georgia in November. State of Alabama, of course, Alabama and Auburn were a little slow to recruit him the way Georgia did. But then you saw the championship celebration come around. That was January 15th. No DeMarcus Riddick. Then you saw G-Day come around when a lot of the commitments came back into the fold. No DeMarcus Riddick. So that's going all the way back to April, man, where I kind of wondered what sort of place DeMarcus Riddick still had. When he found a way to hop out of a luxury automobile that we will not plug here, Brandon, abiding by rules, even though we're just getting back off vacation, to go to the Alabama spring game at Bryant-Denny Stadium. At that point, I kind of thought that no matter what the National Recruiting Board said or the commitment considered a, so you have Georgia and this is kind of like, I'll use one of your favorite phrases, Brandon, I love. It's sort of like Georgia, and you taking your family to McDowell's the whole time from coming to America, and you're going to McDowell's all the time, and you have feeling pretty good about the number 3 linebacker in the country or number 2. He flip-flopped a little bit with Sammy Brown. But all of a sudden, here comes the chance to go to the other namesake traditional franchise everyone knows and loves with the Golden Arches. And Georgia somehow goes from the number 3 linebacker in the country to the number 1 linebacker in the country. Brilliantly staged, by the way, a couple days before, where, when you lose a 5-star linebacker, and you don't even really have to blink because earlier in the week you already upgraded that slot to the nation's number 1 linebacker. Brandon, I think I had the greatest dessert of my entire existence as a human on this earth. It's called a Delisa di Limon, a lemon delight in Italy. And it was amazing. It was fantastic. But I come back and I plug back into the recruiting network that's served me so well over the last 7 or 8 years. And I think Georgia's recruiting class is going to wind up even better than that. It's going to wind up better than a Delisa di Limon on the shores of the Amalfi Coast in Italy, because you can just name it. You can just picture it. You can imagine it. All incredible possibilities of 6 or 7 names left in the class for Georgia right now are certainly possible.
All right, I want to follow up on 2 things on that for a moment. First of all, I kind of start this off by kind of referencing Christopher Jones, who I believe we're heading for a Sunday announcement on that. How much are Georgia fans going to lean in on this Jones announcement when it comes out here?
Lean in pretty hard. I mean, this is a different type of kid. Son of a minister. Training is very important to him. Faith is very important to him. And he didn't really like all of the theatrics of recruiting, Brandon. He took 3 official visits, one to old friend Mel Tucker, one to Florida, and maybe not so old friend Billy Napier. And then you got the Georgia Bulldogs. He only needed 3. 3 was all he needed. Georgia has consistently made him a priority. He had known about Georgia's status with Riddick. He had really stressed for the longest time. He even told me in June Georgia was his leader. They'd moved ahead strictly because of the NFL development. And this is a young man, Brandon. When you start looking at all the tea leaves and you start going CSI, DawgNation to try to figure out what's going on, when you hear a recruit tell me that he wants the work, he's ready for the work, and he needs the work at a place like Georgia, and the fact that Georgia works as hard as it does excites him, that seems like a guy that's fit to play and fit to wear that Power G on his helmet. Okay,
so I've got so much to do. I can't spend a ton of time on this, but I am curious, because you mentioned this a moment ago there as well. This is away from Georgia a little bit, but the video that's out there of Riddick being chauffeured right to the entrance of the stadium for the Alabama A-Day game, I think gives you an idea of how much Alabama had put the full court press on Riddick and ultimately lost him to Auburn. To me, that's the bigger story involving the DeMarcus Riddick decommitment this week. Jeff, just simple language, few words, we'll move on. Is there something wrong with Alabama recruiting right now, or is this just something that Georgia fans are kind of playing around with just for the fun during the summer?
I think the biggest thing for me, and we wrote in the story, Brandon, is it's not it's not Alabama is dipping or Georgia is, took a shot across the bow. I think it's more a matter of Auburn is back. I think the Auburn machine, the Auburn faithful, the Auburn family are rallied behind this new coach. And when it comes to collectives, when it comes to NILs, I think that's probably the biggest story here. Not a dip from Alabama, but a rise from Auburn. Fair
enough. Shifting gears, probably the most newsy thing to happen from a recruiting standpoint this week may have been some public comments by five-star athlete KJ Bolden. You and I both were at the really, I thought, a great event our friends at Score Atlanta helped put on. I was a part of that. You were, of course, there in coverage, too. The first ever Georgia High School Football Media Day. KJ Bolden was there. We played some of the clips from your interview with Bolden during our show yesterday. And, Jeff, the statement that I'm comfortable making here is if I was going to make an online prediction, I don't do crystal balls, things like that, but if I was going to, I'd pick KJ Bolden to go to Georgia. I don't mind risking my reputation on that opinion a little bit, but I would not bet my mortgage on it. Something that would cost me money if I was wrong. I don't believe I would do that. And I thought the interview, whether it's intentional, he's just trying to, kind of create the drama, or whether it is a reflection of what the actual facts are, it seems like Georgia's in a good position here. Georgia fans, I believe they think the Bolden's coming to UGA. But when he makes a statement to the effect of, hey, within the last, I believe he said, couple of weeks, a coach kind of got in his ear and kind of got him to sort of think a different way than he was otherwise thinking before. You think about the pursuit of Ohio State here, the way in which Florida State, I guess, tries to get involved. I believe there's some online chatter he may go to Auburn here this weekend. That, I don't know, it seems like you have to leave at least a little bit of a door open for a little bit of mystery involving the Bolden decision on August 5th. What do you make of the current state of the KJ Bolden set of affairs? You were obviously with him this week.
Yeah, Brendan, so you mean your mind didn't take you to that was Kirby Smart telling him to back off his recruitment until August the 5th because the Dogs need more commitment in August and July was full? You mean your mind didn't immediately go there, my friend? That's not what you were thinking? With KJ, this is what I will say. I'm going through my brain and I'm trying to get stuff in my mind to provide the proper perspective on the closing finish of this recruitment. I feel kind of comfortable saying that if Georgia does not win the Bolden race here, this is probably the most invested Kirby Smart has been in a recruit that Georgia did not win, especially since Georgia has a national championship in the trophy case. I mean, what's something that we've been doing for years and years, Brandon, following the visits? 16 visits to a two-time national champion that are about an hour away that prioritizes you greatly. And I think one of the things I was glad to show folks, besides just the written word with Bolden here, was just what the depth of conviction, what it sounds like coming out of KJ Bolden's mouth when he talks about Kirby Smart, man. I think that's real. I think that's genuine. I think that's not something that he's trying to get a best Oscar, best actor in a recruiting narrative, a picture documentary for. I think that's real. I think he has a true relationship with Kirby Smart. He said it sort of feels like a brother. It sort of feels like family. And I think should Georgia win this race for KJ Bolden, especially when he made those comments that NIL is not going to be a major tell for him or a major change agent for him in his decision, I think that relationship with Kirby Smart will probably be the reason why. Yeah,
I think that's really interesting because he did talk as much about Kirby Smart as you almost hear any recruit talking about anymore, where it's like, 9 times out of 10, when a player commits to Georgia, it's praise going to the direction of a Fran Brown or a Glenn Schumann or a Todd Hartley or whatever else. The position coaches have played such a big role in a lot of these recruiting wins. But, boy, it's really Kirby Smart himself that Bolden talked a lot about here in that particular interview, which I think is an important tell. I also think, your statement there about the NIL stuff is kind of interesting because what I heard, from in this particular conversation with Bolden was obviously he acknowledges the long-range money you can make in the NFL is clearly more money, the long-term payoff. But, he did mention the idea of NIL being a factor, and sometimes we don't even really hear Georgia recruits even bring up the topic of NIL. So on the one hand, he clearly seems to have his ducks in a row in terms of the best opportunity for the biggest payday coming after college, but it's not like he didn't pretend NIL existed either, right?
Yeah, I think it's a consideration. I think that's just something. Sometimes, Brandon, when recruits talk about NIL, it is almost either the acquisition of NIL or the lure of NIL or perhaps turning down higher NIL as they make their decision. That's what I hear from recruits all the time is like, I know if I go here, I'll make more, but I know if I go here, that's the place where I feel most comfortable that they will ensure that I reach my future of shaking Roger Goodell's hand on the stage and playing on Sundays. I will find it interesting, Brandon. This might be the first time I've ever heard you talk about, and my creative mind went in this direction. Some folks have crystal balls, but it sounds like you're ready to go out and trot out a crystal BA here for KJ Bolden.
We may do something with that, Jeff. That's actually not a bad idea. Let me give you one more on Bolden, then we got more we got to talk about here for a second. I was not at the event when Buford was there. I didn't get there until after they had already left. But a lot of people are kind of sharing the video stuff with me of whether it be KJ saying "Go Dogs" or almost slipping up and providing what some people thought was a little bit of a reveal there. I'm typically on guard about stuff like that. That to me is Owen Popo wearing a bunch of Georgia gear around Grayson High School before he committed to Auburn. Like, there's an element of some of that kind of stuff that sort of feels like an intentional swerve. Am I on the wrong path with that? What did you make of some of the, I guess, more subliminal stuff that may have gone on around Bolden this week?
Yeah, the subliminals, Brandon, were definitely subliminating. I'm making up words there, but I'm just trying to show you something there. But I was there, Brandon. It really felt that there was, whether it's amongst his teammates or it's, kind of maybe led by Dylan Raiola at the same time, there's already two very strong Georgia commitments in the Buford High program. And it's funny, I think somehow the Buford High curse still exists on message boards, and that's probably the greatest ecosystem that thrives in terms of Buford High not being a Georgia pipeline, and certainly there's reasons that would indicate that it is not. But at the same time, you've got Jaden Perlotti, who's a five-star in the 202025 class.
He's good. Jeff, he's good. He's good.
Super good. And you know what, Brandon? It sounds like, in some weird way, it's almost like he's had an uncle named Brandon talking to him a lot about Georgia because he really loves the Dogs, and Raiola really loves the Dogs. And so there are two really good yin-yangs on both sides of the ball that are strong. I guess I'll use some Star Wars stuff because I know you love talking about Star Wars, but the dark side may be somewhere in the Buford High locker room, but there's some Jedi Master Bulldogs in that locker room as well in terms of Raiola and Perlotti. And I'll say this, I can speak with accuracy here that I did hear the term "Go Dogs" come out of KJ Bolden's mouth at least once while he was leaving the premises at the IBEW headquarters down there in downtown Atlanta. And that was actually while I was talking to Jaden Perlotti. So, Jaden Perlotti liked the sound of that.
There you go.
Certainly he'll have two teammates very enthused about his selection on August the 5th if he does decide to ride with the red and black.
All right, let's talk about Dylan Raiola here for a moment because he obviously kind of made, I guess, what I'll call his debut in a Buford uniform at this particular event. I'm curious of a couple of things here. First of all, what's his reaction to the way in which we sort of treat Georgia high school football? That's got to be a little bit different than it is, way out there in Arizona. And the second thing is, and I talked to Terrence Edwards about this a little bit yesterday, Jeff, Buford's got a state championship to win, and Buford has a history with a lot of great players throughout the years. This is not a throw the ball all over the yard type of team. What kind of senior year do you expect Raiola to have here in Georgia? And I guess how did you find him this week when you had a chance to talk to him?
Two words, professional and polished. I think Raiola, I don't know whether he's been coached or he goes in with a sentiment that he's just trying to do the right thing by people. And the more it sounded to me, and this is my own interpretation here, the more he gushed about how Georgia high school football was different, or the Buford High practices were different, or the speed of the game was different, then that was in some ways not a compliment for Arizona high school football in general. And I don't think Raiola really wants to go there, and I can't fault him for that. If that's actually what he's doing, that's something to appreciate and respect. But he kept saying the term to me, football is football. Like, you're still going to go out there, you still got a mic to identify, you still got to see what the coverage is, watch the safeties, what gets your pre-snap read, set your protection. And he's very much a thinking man's quarterback, despite all the accolades that come his way. And, Brendan, there's a story I've got to write sometime, which I feel is the A to Z about what everyone is missing about Raiola. And I'll say this pretty strongly. Everybody talks about what Raiola is not. And when he throws an incompletion or he doesn't look good in a drill, or everybody goes, gasp, that's the number one quarterback in the country. I want folks to remember when they look at Raiola, they should know that this is a young man that never played quarterback at all until his 9th grade season, and that was JV football. And then he had a 10th grade season, and then he had an 11th grade season. So this guy, even though he's rated number one in the country, you got to remember, Brandon, these are prospects. They're not how good they are now. It's how good they will be when they're eligible for the NFL draft. And I think the gulf of how great Dylan Raiola is now, and then how far he can still grow and get better, I think that's what should get Georgia football fans and DawgNation really excited. He's already rated number one in the country when he's pretty much got at least 3 or 4 years fewer than every other 5-star Elite 11 quarterback out there playing that position. I think Buford will help him. He told me that Buford is a perfect fit for his skills and his system. He likes this system at Buford better than some of the ones he's already quarterbacked and captained in the past. And he was very excited. I think he showed me a picture on his phone where he had some film of early Buford opponents, and he had his iPad out and he had his notepad out and he was watching some film and he had the clicker. Just go ahead and immersing himself in quarterback knowledge, that quarterback nerd type stuff he needs to know, film room junkie. And that is such an amazing statement to see or hear, because this is a guy, when everybody looks at Dylan Raiola, they gush about the tools, they gush about the prototype size, they gush about the football DNA from his father, they gush about the big arm and the platform throws and the off-platform throws. But this is a young man that is going to think the quarterback position, or at least put the effort and energy into it, as much as anything he's going to do in terms of throwing a ball 70 yards.
All right, I want to finish with a chat about the defensive line situation. And this is pretty juicy right now, I would say. You got online chatter about a big-time defensive lineman visiting Georgia this week, but you've also got a lot of online chatter about a couple of defensive line targets not taking high-profile visits, I guess. Let's see if we can cover this. You know, Williams-Nwaneri apparently not going to Oklahoma. Georgia fans take that as a good thing by not going. I mean, not visiting to Oklahoma. They take that as a good thing. Breland, the guy out of Mater D, maybe not going to Texas A&M. That's been kind of talked about. I guess LJ McCray from Daytona coming up, seeing Georgia maybe. It seems like there is a lot happening with defensive line recruitment right now, Jeff. All I know is the online chatter. But tell me what really is happening here with what looked to be three major targets with, I guess, varying interests possibly in UGA. Give me the insight here on this.
Yeah, I think you got three different guys that at three different points have really loved the thought of going to Georgia. Brandon, I have to laugh because Georgia football recruiting, it seems that they find new levels of greatness and grandeur. But we've reached the point now where, you remember 4 or 5 years ago when people were like, Georgia needs to get a visit from this guy, or Georgia needs to get him back on campus so he can fall deeper in love. But now it's like the things that get folks excited on the online chatter world is he's not going there. He's not going out with so-and-so this weekend. And that some sort of, that feeling there tends to think that Georgia's going to hold serve, or nobody's going to gain ground, or nobody's going to come in with a huge new NIL offer. I'm under the belief, Brandon, and I've kind of said this on Hedges for a while, that I think of the three, McCray, man, if McCray goes to Georgia, Brandon, this is a top 10 pick all over again. Mm-hmm. Same thing for Nwaneri. You got Breland as well. I've felt kind of internally for a while that Georgia was going to get at least one of those three, and then in my thought it became two of those three. And now I think there's really the true possibility that they can get three out of those three.
Wow.
I just wonder if Georgia was able to land Nwaneri and McCray, whether that would just be enough for Breland to say, you know, maybe I should find another spot. But that might be something for Breland to go, nah, I want to be a part of this destructive wrecking crew type defensive line. Because, Brandon, the numbers are all going to work. There's always a ebb and flow and a cause and effect in recruiting. So when Sean Washington transfers out and when Bear Alexander transfers out and Georgia's 2022 class looks very light, in the 2023 they didn't go gangbusters in terms of internal kind of defensive line 3, 4, 5 techniques, because all they have is Josh Jarrett and all they had was Jordan Big Davy Hall as well. It does bode well for Georgia to kind of load up with maybe 4 or 5 elite defenders, trench mob guys in 2024. And I'm going to do this. This has got to be make sure we don't do recruiting analyst malpractice. Brandon, the thought of adding 2 of those 3 names or 3 of those 3 names to Joseph Jonah Ajanye, 6'5", now 275, and Jordan Thomas. Brandon, if Jordan Thomas played anywhere else except New Jersey, if he played in Villa Rica, if he played in Carrollton, if he played in Florida, he'd be talked about as a top 50 overall prospect as well. You just don't see guys like that at that size that move so well. And then another guy we saw, we have to mention his name, Brandon, because he does not get enough respect, I think, amongst the fan base, is Quintavious Johnson at Mays. Quintavious, you see him rocking that Mays tie and that sport jacket, the way all the Mays Raiders showed up for that event on Wednesday. And I'm going to tell you, that's another guy that you sit there and say, him plus the University of Georgia, in my mind, says that guy's going to be an NFL early round draft pick one day. He is an absolute freak of a person, of a prospect, and he is so wired right to go in Georgia and succeed and thrive.
It seems like some of the stuff that's happening here along the defensive line, if you ever play like daily fantasy or something like that, the theory of sometimes you go stars and scrubs, where it's like you put a lot of money in, into one big name, and you may have to kind of populate around that big name with some lesser players. It seems like that's the biggest threat to Georgia when it comes to stuff like this. Like, look at Williams-Nwaneri as an example of this. It's like, you hear about Missouri being a factor for his recruitment. Oklahoma's not really, what they once were. It's like, these programs, they can't pull an elite class right now, but they can put all their eggs in one basket and go after that elite player. Maybe for Breland, maybe for Nwaneri. It seems like that's the biggest threat to Georgia, whereas Georgia's got obviously the most to sell, but what Georgia can't do that an Oklahoma or a Missouri or even right now even a Texas A&M, what programs like that can do is, hey, we can make you a priority in a way that Georgia cannot because Georgia's got so many other great prospects. It seems like late in the process, that's the battle here for Georgia. A lot of programs who are kind of putting all of the eggs in what I'll call their NIL basket in the direction of maybe like one or two players because that's their best chance at success. Is that also what you see happening?
Yeah, Brandon, that's kind of like Major League Baseball salary cap. If you spend all your money on a number one starter, then you won't have the ability to go get an elite closer or an elite third baseman or corner infielder for your lineup. Maybe you have to go with the rookie developmental guy or a platoon there. That's what I kind of see where, and it's a situation. Let's say the Nwaneri recruitment, the home fires start burning as well as the NIL collective at Mizzou starts churning, and let's say Georgia doesn't win that recruitment. Well, that's going to just increase the odds of Georgia getting in on and maybe securing the Breland and securing the commitment from a guy like LJ McCray, Brandon. When you see LJ McCray, I think the things I've heard and people that have talked to him at some length and scouted him at some length, you're going to look at him and he's going to look every bit of 6 feet 7 inches, man. And that's a guy. You get him to Georgia, you get him iron sharpening iron for 3 or 4 years in Athens, and that's a future top 10, top 15 pick, and you add it to what Georgia's got. And it's just crazy. I've got a piece that I'm working on. I started out with something simple, but kind of the way things go in your work, when you start out one way and it kind of mushrooms into something else, I really have found, having been doing this since 2015 on the ground floor and watching every Georgia recruiting class and saying, okay, that's a little bit different in the matrix here than years past, or that's anomaly I haven't seen before. Georgia is finding ways to, like I keep wanting to come back to say, there was the land speed record, or there was the sound barrier for Georgia recruiting that I think, okay, that's it. That's probably all they're going to get. And somehow they can find more RPMs. They can find more horsepower under the hood to be even more impressive in certain select areas. Brendan, here's a quick little teaser about that. You will look on the field from the Sanford Stadium press box. Of course, it's going to be in the west end zone now, not the traditional one, in years to come. You will look down and see a Georgia defense, and there will be a top 5 overall prospect at that position, at every position on the Georgia defense. And then the backup, even projecting whether it's this guy or this guy or this guy, the backup should also be a top 10 player at their position. You're going to look at a team, a defense, and you're going to have the option to put in a top 100 overall player, an All-American, a top 5 player, or a top 10 player at every position on the defense. And that's if, and only if, another Georgia 3-star special doesn't come in and beat one of those guys out and rise to the top in terms of Georgia football. That doesn't happen, Brandon. It hasn't happened. And that's why a guy like me, who's trying not to sound like a yard barker or the kid on the corner trying to sell newspapers with the latest, greatest headlines with some sizzles. But it's better. They're going to be better. They're going to have better players. And the wonderful part of this equation is better players is cool, but you better develop the kids like nobody else in the country. And Georgia already does that. That's why I feel so confident in making a statement like that.
All right, 2 very quick things before we let you go, because this has been, the Frost Nixon interview in terms of length thus far. First of all, a moment ago you said keeping the home fires burning, always up for a classic country gold reference. There's always room for a Ronnie Millsap reference in a show like this, so thumbs up there on that. And then when it comes to the topic at hand, one final thing here. We've already seen Georgia pull a pair of teammates in this 2024 class. Do you think the Breland stuff has any impact on Nate Frazier, or is it Frazier that's impacting Breland, or are these two separate things all the way around? Because I tell you right now, more and more Georgia fans are watching this Nate Frazier tape at running back. This is another very, very hot name for these Georgia fans right now.
As great as that Frazier tape is, Brandon, modern day, they've got another running back, a 5-star, who's been pegged as the number 1 running back in the country in 2025. That guy's also on the same team. So as good as Frazier looks, he's not the clear 1A bell cow for his high school team. To answer your question, Brandon, let's go super double jeopardy witness stand type stuff. There's a real possibility that you want to talk about continuity and chemistry. Georgia could have 4 sets of high school teammates on this 2024 recruiting class that's ranked number 1 in the country by far. That's the two. That's Breland and Frazier out of modern day. Neither one of those is committed yet. That's potentially Raiola and the KJ Bolden out of Buford. They've got Joseph Jonah Ajanye and then also Justin Williams as well. And I mean, you just start stacking all these names together. Is one set of teammates possible? Is 2 set of teammates possible? Is 3 set of teammates possible? Brennan, anything is possible with this class and this staff right now.
Really fun stuff and a great way to close it all out. By the way, shout out to our great coach. I know you and I both are fans of, Maurice Dixon. He's taking Creekside to California to play Mater D this year. They will play anybody. They beat East St. Louis a year ago. Creekside going all the way out to California to play Mater D this year. Like the whole idea of playing anybody, anywhere, anytime. Like the Creekside football team here in the Atlanta area, they take that doubly serious, more than anybody else. So shout out to Coach Dixon taking his team out there to play Mater D this year, or Mater Day, however you say it. Either way, fun stuff. Jeff, thanks for being here today. We will look forward to reading plenty more from you at DawgNation.com and perhaps hearing from you before the weekend is done there as well, if things go Georgia's way on the commitment front. Thank you for your time, Jeff.
Hey, Brandon, quick quality control, because I've already got a text from somebody about it. Real-time engagement here with the DawgNation Daily program. I did not say the 4th set of teammates because those 2 were already in the fold. That's 5-star cornerback Ellis Robinson, the 4th at IMG Academy, and now Showtime Nitro Tuggle, the wide receiver who may very well wind up a borderline 5-star in the 2024 class as well at wide receiver. He is playing his senior year at IMG Academy as well. That's how 4 teammates could be possible. Just had to do a little quick quality control there for everybody out there.
Real-time fact-checking. Boy, you love to see that. Hey, good stuff, Jeff. Have a good weekend. We will talk to you soon.
Take it easy, brother. See you later.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right. Admittedly, that was a long one, but I think it was worth it. I think we got some good information. It probably needed, just given all that's going on there. And the stuff around the defensive line between Breland and McCray and Winery. The Winery thing, I really don't even know what to make of all that. But, I'm entertained. I'm into it. I'm watching it, and we'll see where it goes. And, Jeff did not wave the white flag on any of those recruiting battles on behalf of Georgia. And as I told Jeff, Frazier, the running back, that is a very, very hot name behind the scenes with Georgia fans here right now. People really like him. And if he, goes Georgia's way, Georgia fans are going to be really, really happy. And the other thing is, and we could, do this stuff all day long, Jeff kind of points out is that I think the player that's been in the fold here for a while as a commitment that's getting the benefit of kind of a new consideration right now, maybe Nitro Tuggle, it does sound like he's really kind of rocketing up the boards here right now. So that is kind of fun to consider. Now, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Fun to think about one of these Royal Caribbean cruises here in 2024. And the cool thing that, as I think about what we kind of go into the weekend, is that one of the things that Royal Caribbean I think really is really dominating on right now are these kind of shorter cruises. Because let's face it, sometimes for me, I'm an experienced cruiser. I like that. After the season, a lot of times you just want to kind of get away, unplug from it all. And really in a situation like that, for me anyway, the best way to do that is a 7-night cruise. I kind of go off the grid a little bit, kind of unplug my phone a little bit, and just sort of get into that and do all that kind of stuff. And think about the debut of Icon of the Seas in January of 2024. That's going to be 7-night cruises. For a lot of folks, that sort of full week 7-night cruise is the best thing to do. But there's an entirely different category of cruiser, and sometimes I'm also in this category there as well, which is I got kids. My son's into baseball. My daughter's into gymnastics. My wife's got 1,000 things going on. Schedules can be tough to coordinate. And so sometimes all you have is the weekend. And short drive from where we are in Port Canaveral, right there sort of past Orlando, you've got some great opportunities on those short 3 and 4 night cruises. Days of Friday, you get on the ship on a Friday, you get back on a Monday, you go to work that day if you wanted to, working remotely, whatever else. But I mean, you don't miss that much time. Now you may be on for 3 days. You're like, boy, I wish I'd been on board longer. But if you've only got a few days to devote to cruising, Royal Caribbean kind of dominates that sort of 3-night, 4-night cruise. That's what our DawgNation cruise is going to be coming up next April. But you've also got the weekend kind of cruise stuff too. In fact, when they debut Utopia of the Seas next July, that's a brand new Oasis class ship that's going to be devoted to the 3 and the 4 night sailings. That's how much Royal Caribbean's investing into those short cruises, either for first-time cruisers who kind of want to take that first step, or for folks who just are busy. And like I said before, sometimes all you can find are those sort of 3 and 4 nights kind of devoted to that cruise experience. No one does the short cruises better than Royal Caribbean. So reach out to Jessica Slater. She's a great travel agent. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Also, RoyalDogs.com. That's her website, information for the DawgNation cruise. You can get that from her there, RoyalDogs.com. More on that. All right, a couple of interesting stories here. So we have a response in the Pac-12 to the news we gave you yesterday that Colorado is leaving. It kind of waited around for information on the media rights deal. Never really came. Colorado has bolted to go back to the Big 12, the league they were in prior to coming to the Pac-12. And the Pac-12 has now released a statement about next steps for this organization. I'm going to read this to you. It says, this is the beginning of the statement. The Pac-12 is comprised, excuse me. They may be compromised as well, but the word here is comprised. The Pac-12 is comprised of world-leading universities and athletic programs. See, to me, this is kind of the problem with the Pac-12, which is, they are so into their academics. There's nothing wrong with academics, of course. Nothing wrong with that. But there's a certain, arrogance I think the Pac-12 sort of approaches this kind of stuff with, of, hey, we're all fancy institutions. We are into research. The AAU, the Organization of Universities, they're all really proud of the fact that, they're all really, really, strong academically, and they sort of treat academics as more important than sports and all this kind of stuff. And they've rejected members throughout the, potential members of the league throughout the years because they didn't quite feel like those schools were up to snuff academically compared to what the Pac-12 was. And as I said before, I'm not against academics. Obviously, you want to be as smart as you can be, of course. But if you want to kind of pretend to play that game of sort of being above all this from an academic standpoint, when the athletic stuff passes you by, then you need to sleep in the bed that you made for yourself. And I think in some respects, that's what the Pac-12 is doing here. They go on to say, we share a commitment to developing the next generation of leaders, supporting student athletes' academic athletic excellence, and broad-based athletic success. We remain, one more thing here too. The idea of broad-based athletic success, that's code language for we care more about football. And we care more than just about football. And if you want to go back to one of the greatest failures in the history of television, not just college sports, but the history of television in particular, was the Pac-12 network. The Pac-12 kind of got a jump on some with its network and made a huge tactical error. They had a calculated decision. They were going to kind of try to create extra exposure for what they thought was one of their most valuable assets, which was their Olympic sports, things like that. Truly, this is not a joke. I'm being serious. A lot of Pac-12 schools have had a lot of success in kind of Olympic-style, non-revenue sports, and the Pac-12 sort of thought of itself as that's one of the things that made the league distinctive, is we're more than football. Those rednecks down south, all they care about is football, but we are into rowing and stuff like that. And so they're going to put all that stuff on television. And the Pac-12 network ended up being one of the most grotesque failures that media has ever produced. And once again, it's the bed the Pac-12 has made. They are now forced to sleep in it. They go on to say in this particular statement, we remain committed to our shared values and continuing to invest in our student athletes. Today's decision by Colorado has done nothing to disrupt that commitment. We're focused on concluding our media rights deal and securing our continued success and growth. Immediately following the conclusion of our media rights deal, we will embrace expansion opportunities and bring new fans, markets, and excitement and value to the Pac-12. Now, some of you are aware of this, that we've been waiting on the Pac-12 to announce a media rights deal for months and months and months here. The last straw on this was supposed to be at Pac-12 Media Days recently, and it's still not able to be shared and produced. And the longer this goes on, the more you're left to conclude that in terms of like real money on real television networks, it's just not there for the Pac-12. They're going to have to settle for a streamer, which essentially will make them irrelevant in the eyes of kind of the average college football consumer, because it's fine to put an NFL playoff game on, like, say, Peacock. This year there's going to be one because NFL fans will seek that out. And it's okay to put wrestling, like WrestleMania, on a streamer because, once again, diehard, hardcore pro wrestling fans will go seek that out. The same thing with, like, UFC on ESPN Plus or, whatever. I mean, it's like, why does Netflix and what do you call it, Max, whatever now, why do they spend so much money on a lot of these shows? It's because you create a buzzworthy show, people will go seek it out. But the Pac-12 right now does not have enough buzz for people to go seek it out. If it buries itself on some streamer somewhere, then literally the only people who watch it will be Pac-12 fans, and there just aren't very many Pac-12 fans left. We also know that when it comes to Pac-12 expansion, the expansion idea they have had is a San Diego State. That's the kind of waters they've been swimming in terms of potential expansion. So what you have here is a situation where you got to try to figure out, okay, what's the division of the revenue of the Pac-12 moving forward? You've got a couple of teams, Washington and Oregon, which have far greater stature than the other teams in the league right now. Oregon, you probably realize, because of the Nike connection. Washington's a bigger fan base and a bigger, college sports entity than you might think. In fact, they're actually a top 20 recruiting team more often than you might think there as well. Like, Washington's kind of a real football program, even though they're stuck way up there in the Pacific Northwest. Probably a bigger overall level of support you might think. So there's some thought of, you give extra money to Washington, extra money to Oregon, but guess what? You've got the teams at the bottom part of the league right now who, if they see that, you better believe they're looking to bolt. Because the real danger for the Pac-12, and obviously this statement glosses over this, is that now that the lowest team on the Pac-12 ladder, the lowest rung of that ladder, Colorado, has bolted, then the team that was next in line on that becomes the most likely to leave now too. And that's probably Arizona, more so than an Arizona State or a Utah. Utah is sort of, sort of recommitted itself to the Pac-12 here recently. So the next team, the bottom rung of the Pac-12 ladder, is probably Arizona. And Arizona folks are very non-committal right now. So if Arizona follows Colorado in leaving the Pac-12 and going to the Big 12, then my best guess is the entire league just dissolves. Now, the problem for Oregon and Washington is they have no invitation to the Big Ten. The Big Ten's had every opportunity to invite them and hasn't done it. So I don't believe Oregon and Washington are going to the Big Ten. Could they come to the SEC? I don't know. We're going to take a road trip to Seattle anytime in this league's future. I don't know. But I do believe the Pac-12 is hanging on by a string right now, and I think it is quite foreseeable the entire league dissolves. I'm going to say it one more time what I said yesterday. This is one of those things the national media has gotten wrong from the word go. There was this perception out there that the Pac-12 was somehow stronger than the Big 12 for reasons that were never obvious to any kind of like regular-minded folk. That, Big 12 fans were like, why should the Pac-12 be stealing from us and bolstering itself? Why couldn't we steal from them? Guess what? The average fan kind of got this right. Those kind of out west who care about this kind of stuff, it is the Big 12 that's had some shrewd maneuverings post-Texas and Oklahoma, losing those two flagship schools. The Big 12's made some strong moves. They are now in a position to, if not more than just survive, they may thrive. And the Pac-12 may no longer exist. One more quick story to give you, and this is a little bit of an interesting footnote to a story we've been following. The fact that Jeremy Pruitt has now taken a job as a high school PE teacher. Of course, he kind of came up from the ranks of high school. He was Rush Probst's defensive coordinator there at Hoover, worked his way up to the top of the coaching profession, and now going back to Plainview High School in Rainsville, Alabama. I guess Pruitt's father also works there. So Pruitt's going to be a PE teacher, and I guess do some coaching there too. And I said before that I realized that for a lot of Georgia fans, Pruitt's a fairly distasteful figure because of the way he behaved when he was working at Georgia and also maybe just being a part of some SEC rival programs, whatever else. But I thought the way the Tennessee thing played out was really unfair to Pruitt. The idea the institution saves itself, kind of using the cover from the NCAA, and a guy like Pruitt gets the book sort of thrown at him. A 6-year show cause, a 1-year suspension over the course of that 6-year period on the first year of any job that he's hired for, that essentially makes Jeremy Pruitt unhireable. If it wasn't for this NCAA stuff, Pruitt would probably be Alabama defense coordinator right now. But as it stands for the next 6 years, he's unhireable. So Why is he taking this job at the high school level? Does he just love the game and want to be around it? Does he need the money? My guess is probably doesn't. Does he need the health insurance? Maybe there's a chance that's true. I don't know. But interesting to see Pruitt, kind of continuing his coaching life here and, taking this job here at an Alabama high school. So for now, Pruitt not going to probably be a figure in major college athletics. Does he get back to the NFL? He did work with the Giants. Was the Giants, I think, last year, 2021, or sometime in recent years. He's worked in the NFL. So we will see where all of this goes. Jeremy Pruitt obviously dealing with a show cause that probably locks him out of college football for the very near future, but back in Alabama around a high school program again, teaching PE, so kind of coming full circle for Jeremy Pruitt right now. And we'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. I tell you, before we play the music, I've got a bunch of golden shoes today, so let's do the shoes, and then we'll fire up the music after that. Go ahead and throw the first one out there. Our buddy Ryan Walker sends this, and the idea of some crying Florida fans right now, it seems like there are a lot of those because of the success that Georgia's having. Ryan's caption says, when that 1980 isn't 1980ing like it used to. Yeah, for a lot of Florida fans who like to make fun of Georgia's long national title drought, guess what? All of a sudden, it's the Florida title drought that starts to feel a little bit longer. And Ryan Walker's absolutely right about that. Very funny stuff indeed. Next one on the screen, John Paul Williams, who's always a great commenter and tweeter and everything else, shares some beautiful artwork here. He says it's his good friend Haddon McKinney just completed this, celebrating the Dogs' back-to-back national championships. Can't get over how good it is. Super talented. Yeah, great artist rendition here of the Georgia back-to-back. You see the dog there kind of resting on the hammock, sunglasses being raised up, beverage in hand. I'm going to trust that's a finished long drink. So very good stuff for John Paul Williams. Also Haddon McKinney, great artist, sharing all of that. John, thanks for that. It's a really cool thing to be able to see here today, and we'll give a golden shoe in that direction too. How about our next one? Speaking of the finished long drink, follower of Christ, South GA Dog 13 on Twitter, sharing us a mom-and-pop convenience store in Orlando. Boy, look how good and cold and enjoyable that finished long drink is. I see the cranberry. I see the traditional with the grapefruit flavor. That is good stuff, South GA. Thanks for sharing that indeed. Love seeing the finished long drink down there in Orlando, Florida. Maybe driving through there on your way to Port Canaveral on the way to a Royal Caribbean cruise. You're going to get another sponsor in on that, too. Georgia on Tap shared this. Mark Sloniker, of course, a former Georgia basketball player and former Georgia basketball radio analyst. On the subject of the Baseball Hall of Fame, this kind of came up that Scott Rowland and Fred McGriff both had a tie to UGA. So Georgia on Tap said that, Rowland could have been a hoop dog. And then I guess McGriff had his sort of tie to Georgia baseball there as well. So kind of a cool Georgia tie-in to the Baseball Hall of Fame stuff from last week, which is really fun. And for me, I'll always remember, Fred McGriff was one of my favorite players before he came to Atlanta. Just big slugging first baseman. You just kind of enjoyed him in Toronto and then San Diego. When the Braves traded for him in '92, one of the most thrilling things I can really ever remember. Just super exciting there on that. Incredible to see. So great to see both Rowland and McGriff going to the Baseball Hall of Fame, and the great tie that I was not aware of they had with Georgia athletics, both on the baseball front and the basketball front, especially in the case of Rowland. I didn't know that at all. Then one final golden shoe to give you here today. I think this is really funny. So Thad Stokes sent this to me. So he said his daughter is attending a team volleyball camp at a, quote, university that will not be named. At least she was raised right. And so I don't think I'm doxing a high school girl by showing you this because he shared it with me, but it's a picture of the Florida volleyball camp T-shirt, and she sends this back to her dad that says, "I feel gross." And she says, "I'll only wear this if I have to have a gun to my head." And he says, "You're going to need a shower when you get home, and don't bring that in the house." So, and she kind of laughs back at that. So incredibly funny stuff there from the Stokes family about the Florida T-shirt. You got to think that's a pretty funny thing to be able to see. And, yeah, a lot of high school kids going around to these camps here right now, and you get these T-shirts for some of these schools you don't really want to wear. And I would certainly say that it looks like the Stokes family is raising their kids right if they know that Florida volleyball T-shirt is nothing to be worn anytime soon. So really funny stuff across all the board there with a lot of golden shoes. And with that, we can wrap up today's show. So we are knocking on the door of an hour 15 on the program today. This is a long one. This is as long as we've done in quite some time. So if you're still with us, thanks for being here. And we hope you're getting ready for a great weekend. We'll keep our eyes on what goes down with Christopher Jones possible good news on the Georgia recruiting front there on that. Stay close to DawgNation for a lot more on that and all the other stuff that goes down with UGA recruiting here. Kind of getting back to the business of hosting some visitors. And also next week, the start of Georgia practice. That is going to be a lot of fun, too. So make sure you check all that out. Now, speaking of the lousy, stinging Gators, who've had their shots and made their fun of Georgia in the past, all of a sudden now no one around Gainesville's laughing anymore. And for some of our folks who have to visit down there, they're certainly not proud of the time they spend there, as you just saw there a moment ago. But 92 days from now, we'll be in Jacksonville for the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Smiles on our faces because Georgia wins again. You'll have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. I was actually talking to Dari Payro from R.S. Andrews last night. He's got some irons in the fire for this upcoming season. For something that some of y'all have been asking for, Dari behind the scenes actually pushing for this. I'll tell you more about what that is later on. I can't tell any of it right now, but it's an example of, Dari sort of pushing our people to do something we probably need to be doing anyway. We'll tell you more about that coming up when we have the opportunity to do so. All right, so we'll get to the comments. Apologize for the length of the show today, but we had some good stuff as it related to Georgia recruiting, so hopefully that was fun. All right. Paul Moon says, regardless of how good a guy Pruitt is, it's going to take a while to change the public perception. He won't be coaching for a minute. Yeah, and I can't really speak to whether or not Pruitt's a good guy or not. Based on some of the fairly well-substantiated reporting from his time here at Georgia, you'd be left to believe he's not a very good guy, at least in some respects. But other people maybe have a little bit of a different viewpoint on him. I would say he is a competent coach, right? I mean, you rise up the coaching ranks the way that he did. He's a competent coach. And I don't mind telling you, I think he was unfairly scapegoated by the Tennessee stuff. I do. I think Tennessee saw a chance to save face by blaming everything that had gone on with that program on Jeremy Pruitt, when really Pruitt kind of saved them, from a lot of embarrassment at a time in which, Tennessee had years after years after years of embarrassment heaped upon them. Philip Fulmer hires Jeremy Pruitt to kind of save them post John Curry, Greg Schiano fiasco, and what Pruitt got for his decision to come to Tennessee was basically a death penalty. I mean, he's essentially got the college coaching death penalty here, and the person that you got to put the spotlight on all of this is Philip Fulmer. The idea that somehow Fulmer orchestrated all of this. We said at the time, if you were with us back then, that we thought that Fulmer was angling to become Tennessee coach. That obviously failed. His time at athletic director will be viewed as a failure there too. But all of the stench of all of this particular period, none of this gets on him at all. It's all with Jeremy Pruitt. Like, there is no more sort of like, palace intrigue, Game of Thrones type figure than I would say Philip Fulmer. It seems like he was always angling for something, and somehow all of this blew up huge, and Fulmer got the sort of graceful exit from Tennessee, whereas Jeremy Pruitt kind of gets the sanctions that essentially make him unhireable moving forward. That's a very interesting situation. Christopher Vale says that Fulmer's got a lot of experience with backstabbing. That's one way to say it. I guess the most generous way to say it is Fulmer knows how to play the game. Going back to what, a lot of old-time folks will say that he did to Johnny Majors, and like Fulmer knows how to play the game, man. You watch a lot of these. Like I watched, the HBO show Succession. Like I watched that. I'm actually kind of watching season 4 right now. And that's all about backstabbing and angling for, power and stuff like that. And shows like that are kind of interesting. Sometimes, in college football, you see like the real life stuff playing out. Like Philip Fulmer, could have been on a Game of Thrones or a Succession or like one of these shows where, you got to have some sort of plan in place to like amass as much power as you can, no matter who you have to trample over to get there. Fulmer would have been a good character on one of those shows. Larry Goldberg asking, will Pruitt's show cause prevent him from being on Mike's show? I don't know if DawgNation recognizes NCAA sanctions or not. That's a good question. Does he have to do a 1-year suspension before he can show up on DawgNation? I'm not sure. Frank Patterson says, do I see Dan Jackson starting this year? I could see Jackson potentially as Georgia's dime back maybe, but, it's like you're not going to start at safety. I mean, look, the safeties right now are Javon Bullard and Malachi Starks. I don't know that anybody in the country is starting over those two safeties. But could I see Jackson potentially as a dime back? I maybe could. G. Grace Bama Boy said Fulmer turned in Bama and we were terrible for 7 years. That's right. Yeah. If anybody knows about the guy, the sort of maneuvering and kind of backroom dealing, Fulmer with Tennessee is an example of that. Also, there are a couple of people who sort of mentioned that SEC Media Days this year just seemed to be a little bit too professional, like it was a little bit too polished. I forgot who said that, but somebody said that. There is an extent to which that may be true. Like, you want to go back to days in which, like, Fulmer wouldn't come to media days because he was going to get subpoenaed if he showed up. Like, I miss that version of the SEC. Like, I miss the version of the SEC where somebody was destined to embarrass themselves at media day. I kind of miss that. This year, it was a little bit too professional for my take. Somebody said that. I forgot who it was. Paul Moon says, how actually worried am I with Florida State and Bolden? I'm not that worried. I'm actually probably less worried after talking to Jeff a moment ago. I believe he's likely coming to Georgia. I think the drama's kind of fun, but I also think I'm trying to think of the way to characterize this because the percentage stuff doesn't seem to be right. Like, I think the chances are far greater he comes to Georgia than doesn't, but I would not – like, I get the impression there's some Georgia fans online who are like 100%. Bolden, Georgia, 100%. They may turn out to be right. My prediction would be Georgia. I can't quite get to 100 just because it seems like there's enough stuff sort of dangling out there. Can't quite get to 100 on that. Plus, you see late movement with some of these guys. So from that standpoint, I'd leave a little bit of a door ajar just on the basis of that. But I feel like it's pretty. Like, I don't even know that KJ Bolden is the ultimate game-changing player. He might be. He's obviously rated high enough that you believe that he might be. But getting this kind of player from Buford just sort of seems like it has some extra symbolic importance for Georgia. So from that standpoint, I want Georgia to win it. Believe they probably will. But for the Georgia fan who can kind of go to 100 on this, I don't quite know that I can get to that 100% in terms of my confidence level. Jerry Dog Fan says, why are the South Georgia teams not in the Corky Kell anymore? I don't know. We've seen Lowndes there before. So I don't have any say in picking the teams. That is not something I have any say in. So anything that I would say on this is sort of speculation. Like Lowndes, who's been there before, Lowndes has also had a lot of changeover with coaches lately. Like Adam Carter's there now. Isn't he like their fourth coach in 5 years? Like, Lowndes is the kind of team that can come up to Corky Kell, bring a big fan base with them, and that's a fun team to have there at Corky Kell. But they've had just a lot of changeover at coach, which I would imagine would make them making a commitment for the Corky Kell pretty hard to do. Could you see Sean Calhoun bring Colquitt up here? You could. But, listen, I'd love to do it. And I'd love to go do more games in South Georgia as it is. I'd love to do that. I would say there's a really good chance we'll go to Middle Georgia at some point in time this year. I'd be all about going down to South Georgia there as well. I will tell you that as someone who does not handle the production part of the TV, the production people will tell you that it's hard to put a bunch of trucks on the road and go down to South Georgia. That's just kind of hard to do from a production standpoint. I'll say that. But, having more South Georgia teams for the Corky Kell, which we're now calling the Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic, I'd love to do that. If I had to wonder, I wonder if some of the changeover at coach had impact there on that. Jerry Dogfan says Colquitt has been several times. I'd love to have him back. I would. And I'd love to have him back. Spencer Clark says, what happened to Camden County? They've fallen off a little bit. Yeah, not probably quite what they were a couple of years ago. But obviously a part of what's happening there in Region 7 right now. I'm sorry, Region 1 down in 7A right now for sure, though. Yeah, because, Camden kind of had a little bit of an eye-opening Week 1 loss, a year ago. But we'll see. Randy Payne says, go for 3 and 23. Go for 3 and 23 champs. You love that, Randy. Appreciate that. Christy says, don't mind me. I'm just entertaining myself with these Godzilla-style emojis. Glad to see Christy having a good time there. Spencer Clark says, I remember when Warner Robins ruled Middle Georgia. Yeah, Warner Robins has been a great program for a long time. In fact, they're still really very good. Although you've got Marquise Westbrook, the recent Warner Robins coach, who's now taking the job at Peach County. That's another one of those Middle Georgia teams that long history of being very, very good. Kenneth Holt also mentioning Colquitt, Lee, Lowndes, Camden County. Lee County's going to be really good again. The guy that I really like, is Osmani Croma, the running back for Lee County, who's, junior this year? Is that right? Cromart's a junior this year. I really like him a lot. Let's see what. Ridgefly is back. Good to see Ridgefly in the comments section here. 478 Dog says, which, by the way, username checks out down that, says, hate that we lost Westbrook. Yeah, I think he's a really good coach, and I had a chance to talk to him a few times. I think he's a really good guy, too. Good get, I think, for Peach County. I think that's the case. Nature Gators saying that he thinks that, Florida's still in it for Jeremiah Smith. Well, we'll see about that. Obviously, Smith has said all the right things from an Ohio State perspective, but we'll see about that. Obviously, that'd be a huge get if they were able to pull that off. Wally Smith says Ware County is usually strong. Yeah, down there in Waycross, Ware County won 4A state championship a year ago, went undefeated. Really a very good team. Very good team, very good program, and a very tough place to go down there and win. You go down there to Okefenokee Swamp and try to win in Ware County. That is a hard thing to be able to do. BA's Ty Stone Cold Style says any Ryan Wingo knows the wide receiver. Nothing new on that. Last thing I had was that's a December decision on Wingo, so we're probably kind of a holding pattern there on that. I don't get the impression. It's like the old joke that coaches always say to each other when it comes to recruitment. If you don't know, it isn't you. And right now, I don't know, much about this Wingo situation, which would lead me to believe it's not Georgia. But obviously, you got several months for that to potentially change. Let me get a couple of other comments here. Let me go back to DawgNation.com, and we'll go to Facebook. DT reporting we've had 0 streaming interruptions today. That's certainly good news, DT. I appreciate the update on that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. He says the first time this week. So, DT, I appreciate the update on that. Matt Rugavina, very funny. Senior Dog 54 says McGriff looks like he could still play. Super fit for a man his age. Yeah, always been great shape, and like you said, still in great shape. And I think a lot was made about the hat that he would wear in the Hall of Fame, kind of going in, I guess, logoless because of the number of teams that he played for. If anything, if you grew up kind of my age, my era, the hat that he probably should wear is that Tom Amansky hat because he was on those commercials on ESPN the entirety of my life growing up. This is really cool to see that Baruch Dog says that Mark Sloniker was actually the main recruiter for Scott Rowland. So I had no knowledge of any of this, none whatsoever. But that is really incredibly interesting. DT say I owe everybody a chortle with KJ and a commitment. Listen, I'm all there for that. Randy Hall, who knows that Buford area very well, thinks that Raiola is going to bring KJ Bolden with him. You love that. Senior Dog 54 says the Mets put all their money into 2 past prime pitchers and it's not working out. No, that is the case indeed. DT on the subject comparing Bolden to Caleb Downs. Didn't BA say that Downs is the most plug-and-play high school player he's ever seen? He's certainly one of the best I've ever seen. And, I mean, I'll just be candid that I think that Downs is going to probably be one of Alabama's best defensive players this year. That if this Alabama defense is really very good, and obviously you got, Smith and Turner and those guys up front, I mean, they're not necessarily lacking on defense, but I think that Downs is going to be really good. I really do. And I would imagine that he and Haynes both are going to be players that, you're just really disappointed you didn't get. And listen, sometimes you take the L, right? It's like we're not going to sugarcoat it necessarily that Downs would have been a very good player to get. And I think that Downs will probably be like a Minka Fitzpatrick type figure in that Alabama secondary this year. If they're really good on defense, I think they need Downs to have a big year. My guess is they probably get that from him. So if you want to make the Bolden Downs comparison, Bolden would have to go a long way to have as good a senior year as Downs had, because listen, it's not easy to win a 7A state championship in Georgia. It's not. And, Caleb kind of put that Mill Creek team on his back on both sides of the ball a year ago to do that. Now, Bolden's going to be on both sides and heavily a part of the Buford offense here this year too. But, boy, it's hard to be better than Downs was last year. So that's an interesting comparison, for Bolden. And if you think about Bolden, if he does come to Georgia on the field for the Dogs in 2024, can any freshman have that kind of impact for Georgia right now, just given the overall depth? Not quite so sure. Randy Hall on the subject of what Mike said about Latham earlier this week. I was a little surprised by that. A little surprised by that, I guess I have to confess. Let me go to Facebook. On Facebook, see how folks are doing over there with the thoughts of wrapping things up here in just a few minutes. By the way, John Paul Williams, who was part of our Golden Shoes earlier, now part of our Facebook comments, saying, okay, so we didn't show the full picture, but the Haddon McKinney art piece, the hammock is actually resting on the 2 national championship trophies, which is a cool thing. I should have opened that up and shown that more, but that was good stuff. John, thanks for sharing that. Hopefully folks will find that. William Camacho says, I think this team's going to go 15-0 for the second time, which has never happened before. Yeah, I guess that is true, right? We've never seen back-to-back 15-0 seasons ever. Wow. That'd be really, really something. Because Alabama lost in 2012. Their championship year, they lost. Craig Jones, good to have you back here. He says he's been overworked as of late. Well, Craig, we're glad you're able to stop by and see us and take a little bit of a break from that. That's good to have you here today. Thank you very much. Steve Shaffini, good to see him in here. He's very funny. Let's see what else. Sam Burke says, my concern with Ousmane Kromah are his legs. He's very bow-legged, and that puts so much stress on his knee ligaments. Reminds me of Marcus Lattimore. Interesting thing. I'll have to look into that, Sam. Thank you for that evaluation. I'll look into that a little bit more. Let's see what else. Miriam Corbin says we're going to do a DawgNation invasion to Neyland Stadium. So here's what I'll tell you. I'm not supposed to say this. Is our buddy Dari Payro from R.S. Andrews really wants to do one. And, there had been some talk and some chatter about that for a little while. And, we got a lot of folks behind the scenes, our business folks. They're busy. They got a lot going on. So, the status of that had been somewhat uncertain. It's still very much uncertain. But I can tell you that Dari from R.S. Andrews is pushing hard for it. So typically that's good news. So we'll see. Kevin Cooks also says no video malfunctions. That's good to know, Kevin. Appreciate that. Steve Shaffini says that McGriff was drafted by the Yankees, who traded him to Toronto for Dale Murray, not Dale Murphy. Yes, Steve. So it's like I've told you before, I grew up loving baseball cards. I still love them, but I loved them when I was younger. It's like I close my eyes and I see that 86 Donruss, Fred McGriff with the Blue Jays uniform on. Like, just such, it's like nostalgia is obviously a very powerful thing, and that is such a big part of my childhood, just such a big part of my childhood. It's hard not to kind of just like put yourself right back there in that moment when you see that stuff. And Miriam, we also have some news coming up soon, a little season kickoff gathering there as well, for sure. Let's see what else. Jeff Ingram says Auburn should have great NIL. They had it back when it wasn't legal. which is very funny. I guess the word on the street is their NIL game is pretty strong right now because Auburn's got big boosters. So you think about it, in many cases, when you're kind of the second team in a state, especially when that state's not super populous, oftentimes that's not a very big, powerful program. But if you had to rank the SEC jobs, Auburn's, I think Auburn's a pretty good coaching job, right? Better because of the level of support the program gets. It has a lot of fans, even though, the state of Alabama is not nearly as populous as some are. Those folks, as you all know, are very into college football. Like, I'm not even making fun. I mean, I think it's good to be into college football. They are very into college football. So they have a lot of fans. And they have a lot of boosters. And so, therefore, Auburn probably punches above its weight class in terms of its overall stature. And my guess is they will be a factor in NIL. And, look, it's fairly obvious how the game is played, right? It's like Auburn saw Brian Harsin. Auburn boosters were like, we don't think this guy should be the coach here anyway. We're not going to do anything to support him because we don't want to prolong what we think is an eventual disaster. So they stayed hands off. They couldn't get any players. Harsin, burned bridges with everybody he came in contact with. And in fact, go back and look at like the guys that Harsin brought in. Look how few of those are still on the Auburn roster. That sort of tells you everything you need to know. The two things about Auburn right now, which I think are very interesting. A, Auburn was aggressive in the transfer portal and actually pretty aggressive in recruiting. Y'all, they only had 3 players on the third team All-SEC offense and defense. They didn't have any first or second team offense or defense preseason All-SEC. So on paper, this is as weak an Auburn team as it's ever been. They've tried to go to the transfer portal to supplement that. Maybe that'll work. I predicted them. I think they can win 8 games this year because of Hugh Freeze. But on paper, this is a very thin roster. And there is almost no DNA left from Brian Harsin whatsoever. Like, he's been completely whitewashed away from existence. So, obviously, the Auburn boosters felt like they knew the Harsin thing was going to be a disaster. They were proven correct on that. And now they probably are ready to turn the faucet on a little bit. And I'm guessing that Hugh Freeze probably does benefit from that some. Becky Rutledge says Bama's already making excuses about Riddick, saying that Auburn bought him. Well, perhaps they did. But my gosh, when you see video of Alabama and, chauffeuring Riddick right to the front of the stadium on A-Day, they went full court and lost. There's something to that, I think. There is really something to that. All right. Bill Sanders and Craig Jones talking about the Braves. I agree with Bill. He says this weekend series with the Brewers is pretty big. I think it's a pretty big series for the Braves this weekend. I do. Please tell me tonight's not one of those Apple TV deals. Okay, yeah, it's regular Bally tonight. Big Braves Brewers series here this weekend. Also, I guess there's some chatter. Do y'all know this? Is Shohei going to pitch against the Braves next week? Is that right? That'll be fun, too, if that goes down for a completely different reason. But, like Ohtani, what did he do? Pitch a shutout in a game 1 of a doubleheader and hit 2 home runs in game 2? He's Babe Ruth. He's unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. Bill, thank you. Yeah, tonight's game is on Bally, which I appreciate. All right, final comments. Got to get ready to go. Hunker Down 93 says, does DawgNation have any new shirts coming out this season? I don't know about the shirt stuff. I don't. For a myriad number of reasons, I'm not quite so sure about the shirt situation. But I do believe we're going to have a new Go for 3 and 23 logo that debuts very soon. Randy Hall says Caleb Downs is like Eric Berry. Yeah, Berry may be the best high school player you'll ever see, and obviously went on to a great career. Berry was very, very good. Matt Rukavina points out something really cool. Heading towards 2,000 shows next week, at one point in time, a huge narrative on our program would have been trying to get revenge against Florida, and all of a sudden now we have moved well past that. Matt, that is a very good point. I'm thankful to you for having been with us for all of these years. All right, final comments. Major Gator says I can get 3 months of Apple TV for free if you have a Samsung TV account. I think the Major League Baseball stuff on Apple is also free there as well, right? Is that true, or do you have to be an Apple TV subscriber? And listen, people don't like it when some people complain about some of this stuff, but the Major League Baseball stuff being all over the place with some of the streaming is to me so annoying, so annoying. Frank Patterson said Bill Goldberg's son got a preferred walk-on offer from the Shriners. I saw something about this. They're trying to get that UGA DNA into their program. Yeah, there you go on that. All right, so we got to go for now. Good stuff. Really fun comments. Long show. But nonetheless, glad to have you with us for it. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price that's promised, including getting your air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. You can trust them on all of that because it's hot and you don't want to get overheated right now. Air conditioning unit is very, very important. So trust RS Andrews to kind of get yours back under control. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We will look forward to talking to you then.